Hey everyone! So today you and I are going to talk about the sad life of a monolithic application. So let's get into it. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's a story that has never ever happened to me personally, because I've never ever been part, or I really haven't been around for long enough to experience the full scope of something like this. But I've seen it happen, and I have been at the end days of a massive monolithic application. And when I was at that point, just before it all collapsed, and we decided, or rather the company I was working for at the time decided that, hey, we're going to do something differently. We're going to put this thing into sunset mode, as they called it. I talked to all the people who have been involved over the lifetime of this application, and it gave me a very interesting perspective, one that I'm going to share with you now. So, when the monolithic application in question for one of the largest companies in the world started out, it was a system like many others. The use case was very simple. You're selling a product, an e-commerce site. You have different features that were specific at the time to one country, and you have a small team of developers that starts working. The story has been told a million times, and this is usually the case for a lot of companies, how they start out. And the company made good money and expanded and started migrating to different markets. Now, this is where the mistake came in all of this, because the product itself is the sort of product where there's a lot of customization going on. The platform allows the customers to tailor their own business models, well, not exactly tailor, but to a very high extent, tailor the product to their needs. Because as you can imagine, if I have an e-commerce platform and my customer is here in Sweden, yeah, sure, I'll start out building something for the Swedish population, or something that will support the needs of my customer here in Sweden. But what happens when I need to expand to, say, Norway or something like, or Denmark, or somewhere else, or even further away than just Scandinavia? All of a sudden now, I need to start catering to these different customizations. And the biggest mistake that happened here was that as these features were added in, the business, and this is not a mistake, this is very hard to foresee that this will be an issue, because at the time it may have made a lot of sense. Instead of splitting things up in terms of common services and very domain-specific services, such as, let's say that you had a part of the system that was highly specialized to, say, Sweden or to Denmark or whoever, and then you have the commonalities as much as possible in a separate service. Maybe the life cycle of this this video would be pointless, because it wouldn't be the life of a monolith. But everything was kept in the same code base. And as time progressed, more and more customers came to the product. It was doing great. And even today it still is. And things kept growing until a point when issues started to occur. And I mean not the regular day issues, but issues where there were requirements that were so complicated that it started to accumulate what we call technical debt. Now, that debt was building up over years and years and years, but it snowballed as more and more complex features were added, and as the customers, because trust me, don't think that your customers are just going to sit there and not ask you for things. They're going to ask you for things, especially if they're paying you a license fee. Trust me, they are going to ask for stuff, and you're going to have to accommodate all your customers virtually, and that gets very, very tricky in a monolithic application. And why is this so tricky? Well, because think about it. If Sweden comes to you and says, hey, we need this feature, then in the way that this was structured, that means that now Denmark, Finland, and whoever else you're selling this product to, they kind of have to be on board with it as well. Or at least they need to be able to configure whether or not they want this feature. So feature toggling was a major part of this platform, right? So as things progressed, finally we arrived at the point where I entered the company. And at that point, the complexity of the application had grown, and the feature request, because everybody's sharing the same platform, had grown so large that the backlog was, I think it was between 5 and 10 years long, the total backlog of work, booked solid. And finally, but let's not forget, the code was in this stage. In this state, but the company was doing great, making tons and tons and tons and tons of money off of this monolithic super system, and they had virtually all the features that they needed to maintain a very decent, or at least a fairly decent, customer relationship. So the customers didn't migrate anywhere; like they were still sticking around, right? And so I spoke to my colleagues at the time, and they gave me a very nice type of insight into this when the discussion came around, when we were basically told at the company that, yeah, we're going to put this into sunset mode and we're going to build a new product. And I said, me, naive little Frederick, I say, why didn't they think about this first? Because there's so many really big companies out there who uses a service-oriented architecture, and they scale things in a very different way. And so my colleague, he said, well, maybe this is the natural way for things to kind of progress. And I asked, what do you mean? Well, think about, say, Facebook, for example. Okay, and I said, yeah, sure, or what about Facebook? Well, you see, the thing with Facebook is that it started out as this disruptive, amazing product that everybody wanted to use a really long time ago, well, a fairly long time ago. But today, they're actually having troubles keeping up with the smaller companies, the startups. And why is that? And we kind of started discussing about that. And the consensus that we reached was this: as a company matures over time, you make technical decisions or business decisions that will increase the size of your application in general. And if you scale vertically, you will get a more powerful product, and more people, in theory, can accommodate more and more people on the same platform, right? But there's a cost to that. And what we kind of thought was interesting was that Facebook today, even if they today try to be Instagram, which is outdoing them in terms of user interaction, they couldn't, because they have so many features, and they already have all these different customers and clients and all these things tying them down as a organization, that they can't move. And that's the natural growth of going from a small company to a really, really large corporation. It's very tricky to avoid that sort of situation. And what we talked about was basically that's the benefit of these small startup companies, where they can literally, because they don't have all these limitations, they can improve things and simplify things. They can take the learnings from really, really big companies who have become so fat that they can't keep up with these trends and innovations, and simply provide a smaller app, a simpler experience for the user. And a lot of users actually respond to that. And this is why these really big companies spend a lot of time buying small companies. Facebook and Google and these companies, they are buying startups left and right, because they know that this is a threat. They know that they can lose their users. Don't think that just because they are the biggest companies in the world that they can't lose their users, because they can. There's tons of examples of small companies who come around and disrupt an entire industry. Ever heard about Uber? Anyway, What's interesting about this is that the consensus that we kind of reached on how to maybe mitigate this a little bit is to have the approach that Virgin has had and Google in many ways. Maybe you need to reach a point where you just realize that, or rather what you should be going for, instead of one large monolithic super system, maybe it makes more sense to split your products up into an ecosystem of systems. Think about that. Instead of having one massive platform that can do basically everything, and I'm not saying that this is at the architecture level, I'm not saying that you should this is not about microservices or SOA or anything like that, it's more at the conceptual product level. Maybe it makes more sense to do what Google is doing, for example, where they start new companies. Virgin did the same thing. They don't have one big super product. They have many smaller, high quality products. It seems to be working out pretty well for them. And I kind of like that business model. And I like that mentality when you're developing a product. I think that it makes a lot of sense that in the beginning, you start with a monolithic application. And by the end of that monolithic application, by the time that you actually have a successful product, you kill that off. You kill the monolith and use all the money that you've made to simplify that product and break it down into several smaller products. It seems to be a pretty good idea. And that's at least what I feel. Hope you have a great day, and thank you so much for watching.